I genuinely thought there would be 3 people, so nice to see you all.
So I thought we'd just start off by kind of tracking over your career and starting at the start. So at your time at university in your early days, how did you start getting seriously involved in acting, and when did you think that this might be something that you wanted to commit a lot of time to?
I'd always, from playing Third Shepherd, I'd always enjoyed being in plays and writing my own plays and forcing my brother and sister to be in my own plays on the landing at home. The National Youth Theatre was the big turning point for me, insofar as, some people at my school were put in plays as a sort of punishment, and they had to stand at the back holding a spear and grumbling. So to go to the National Youth Theatre, where people actually wanted to be there and share the experience of collaborating on a play, was a real turning point for me. And then in my second year at Cambridge, I thought I'd give it a go, but I would try to be realistic and gave myself 3 years to get an equity card, which in those days you had to have. If that didn't work out, I was going to go and get a proper job and do law. Any lawyers in the room? No, you see, they're all working. You see, that's the great thing about about doing theology at Cambridge, is you have lots of time to do plays.
So has there been any moments, especially in the early days of your career, when you thought actually maybe this wasn't right, or did you always know that this was the thing?
I think as soon as I started, when I got my very first paycheck, I could not believe I was being paid, albeit standing at the back of a stage banging a drum in Midsummer Night's Dream. I couldn't believe that I was being paid to do something that only a few months before at university or at drama school I'd done as a hobby. So that felt very strange and a huge privilege. That feeling has never ever left me. I feel incredibly lucky to do what I do and to have made a career over 30-something years doing it. There was one dip I can remember in maybe my early 30s where I just lost the buzz. Something happened, and I remember doing a job simply to pay the bills. Now, of course, 99.9% of people do a job to pay the bills. I've been, as I say, been lucky enough not to have to, not to feel that, to feel it's a pleasure. And I went to a job and did it just to pay the bills, and I hated every second of it. And I thought, I've got to, I ought to stop this and go and do something that I enjoy. But then something, I don't know what happened. Maybe I slept better that night, but I woke up the next day and actually, got my mojo back. But I do think it is a business that can be very, very tough on you. You do have to be incredibly thick-skinned and resilient to take the rejection, which is most of the time. And if you don't have that thick skin, then it's probably not the course for you. So when you do get the knocks, you have to be able to bounce back. And fortunately, on the one time that I really felt low about it, I did bounce back.
Then I wanted to talk about your early stage career, especially your time at the National and the RSC. How important was it for you to have those years to develop as an actor, to have that time on stage, to try and learn the craft in your early years?
Immensely important. I came in at the very tail end of what was known as the rep system. I mean, there's still some of it about, but very, very little. I started off at really my formative season was at the Colchester Mercury Theatre, where I was through cast, meaning I was cast in 4 or 5 plays through the summer season and into the winter, and I thought, great, I'm going to be with a company. Turned out I was the only person who was through cast. Everybody else sort of visited for each show. And that sense of being in a company I really sought and cherished and looked forward to. So when I got to the National and was playing my tiny parts there, to be able to be part of a company, albeit it's difficult to explain, but there were companies within the company. So I was in 2 plays within a company, and then Alan Ayckbourn had his own company. So for instance, I used to love creeping into the wings and watching Michael Gambon playing the lead role in View from the Bridge. He was also in the same company. They did Small Family Business, and he did a ridiculous farce called Tons of Money. And to see his extraordinary range from the wings was quite a privilege. And again, I think you sort of, I was learning by osmosis, and so I don't think you can teach people to act. I think you can refine their skills at drama school. I happened to go to drama school for a short time, but I don't think I necessarily benefited hugely. I benefited hugely from holding my spear at Regent's Park, from holding my spear at the National, and learning through those company experiences, drawing off the experiences of others, watching Judi Dench and Tony Hopkins playing Anthony and Cleo, again from the wings. Ian Charleson, who's an actor you may not even know of, but he was dying of AIDS, playing Hamlet, and you've never seen a Hamlet like it, because every word about the fall of a sparrow was real, and the audience felt it. And I don't know, extraordinary little glimpses like that. And there was me, you know, who was meant to be in my dressing room or waiting to go on in the other theatre. I was just peeking through the wings. So that was immensely important and valuable.
So now that the rep system is largely disintegrated, what would your advice be to any young actor who wants to get into the industry if they don't have that opportunity to sit with a company for a year, maybe 2 years, and learn the trade that way?
Well, I think the tricky thing is that on film you tend to be cast inevitably for what you look like, what you bring to the table, with not that much variety. What I was fortunate enough to experience was playing a huge range, particularly, as I say, early on at Colchester, where I went from playing in an Alan Ayckbourn to Look Back in Anger, to the Dame in Dick Whittington, to Petruchio in The Taming of the Shrew, that I was given those opportunities. I don't know, is the answer. I don't know how you find those opportunities to be quite so versatile, unless you do as the guys from Lambda, I think it was Lambda, did, and go and form their own company and produce, you know, the play that goes wrong, and create work. I think creating work, those of you here who enjoy theatre and enjoy the creativity of it, you know, you are in the best place to do this. You know, this is where you will cut your teeth and find that opportunity to play roles you might not otherwise be cast in, and to do festivals like, you know, Edinburgh, like, you know, if you get the chance to go and put on a play together in above a pub somewhere, you know, those are the opportunities to flex your muscles, because the traditional routes which were closing down as I came into the business, to my knowledge, aren't as vivid these days. So I don't know. I'm afraid that's a question. I can't wave a magic wand and say, well, you need to do this. But, you know, there are still company systems. I mean, the RSC does try it, you know, to a broader or lesser extent. Form your own. You are the best of the best. You know, you are all potentially amazing actors, directors, designers, and I bet you there are several companies in this room.
So, talking about amazing actors, designers, and directors, what was it like first working with Kenneth Branagh and opposite his Hamlet as Laertes?
Ken Branagh is an extraordinary man for whom I have an enormous respect. He gave me chances when I was young at the RSC that I will be forever grateful for. At the time that he did Hamlet 2 or 3 times in his earlier years in different productions. I was at the Royal Shakespeare Company when he came to do it, I think, for the 3rd time, and I played Laertes. Don't ever play Laertes. It's a really thankless part. He, at the time, was finishing the editing. He was just putting the finishing touches to his film of Much Ado, which is a beautiful, beautiful film set in Italy. He'd just been editing a full-length radio production of Romeo and Juliet. He was in pre-production for Frankenstein with Robert De Niro. And his Renaissance company was still going, but it was perhaps not as busy as it had been. This man's work ethic was utterly astonishing, and he was never late for rehearsals. We did a full-length production, so I think we cut 3 lines. So it was a long old piece. And I remember coming to the first preview, and he suddenly took off like a greyhound in the play. I mean, the speed of this man's delivery was astonishing, and his dexterity with language, and his ability to be, you always hear this phrase, be in the moment, but he utterly was. And I actually went to his dressing room at the interval, and I said, "You bastard, I didn't know you were going to do that." You know, and it was so electric and so astonishing to be on stage with. And then this is the mark of a great leader, when things went wrong, we had this complicated set that kept breaking down, and I can imagine lesser actors really throwing a hissy fit. He was completely calm, would sit in the wings, chatting, chewing the cud, and then they'd fix this bit of machinery and on we'd go, and he'd just pick up where he left off. The one time that he was perhaps a bit naughty was when he was married to Emma Thompson at the time, and it was an Oscar night. It was Oscars night. How can that have been on a Sunday? Anyway, it was Oscars night, and he was going to an Oscar night party. She was in LA, obviously, and that night he took 15 minutes off the show. So he was already going very fast, and he talked even faster, and he took the curtain call, took one bow and straight through the scene dock into a waiting car and down to London to the event. And there was a complaint at the box office that they did think that Hamlet was gabbling on Saturday night. But he was a great leader and a great team player, and passionate about Shakespeare and theatre and the film industry. And he gave me a tiny break. He commissioned me to write a script. I was a terrible writer, but he and Emma gave me a break while we were Used to meet for rehearsals in the Ashcroft room above the theatre to do our fight rehearsals. Neither of us are very good swordsmen, and we just chat a bit about his weekend. He'd been on Concord to go and woo De Niro to play the creature in Frankenstein. I'd been in the pub, all weekend. His work ethic was astonishing, and he did give me a break. He gave me my first line in a movie in Frankenstein, and really encouraged me in my writing, and I've got a great deal of affection for him.
So I wanted just to touch on Frankenstein, like you said. What was it like working alongside Robert De Niro and Helena Bonham Carter as one of your first film commissions?
It was, I've got I had, as I say, one line, and in the story, De Niro's character is a vagrant, and John Cleese, of all people, is playing the sort of professor of medicine at the university, and there's cholera sweeping through town. And so John Cleese gets all his medical students to vaccinate the people of the town against the cholera. And De Niro's character is in line, and he's only got one leg. He's a peg leg. He's a peg leg sort of down and out character. And we're all huddled in this set. It's about a quarter of the size of this room, tiny. And all these people, all these extras, and we were rehearsing in the morning. And there was a bloke in a sort of shawl over his head, and I didn't know who it was, and Ken was whispering to him, and we were just doing some basic blocking, and I thought, oh my God, that's Robert De Niro. It was De Niro before he'd been into makeup. And then when John Cleese was there, and in the scene, De Niro's character gets very suspicious about this thing that they're doing, that the doctors are doing. What's this thing called vaccination? We don't understand it. And he whips out a knife and he stabs John Cleese. John Cleese dies. De Niro gets lynched, hung up in the market square. Dr. Frankenstein goes to cut him down and creates the creature out of that. My role in the film is that I die of cholera, and I'm the hero of the sports field, and my leg gets sawn off and sewn onto the creature. So that was good. Anyway, what was astonishing was to see, in the morning they did the wide shot on John Cleese and De Niro doing this thing, and he played it quite sort of low and menacing, and you're not sticking that thing in me, you're not giving me, I've heard about you doctors, you're going to give us the pox and you're going to kill us, this is what you're doing. And John Cleese is going, no, you've got to understand, this is to help you, this is to save the town. And so that was all happening in the morning, all quite sort of low key. And then after lunch they came around and did they'd done the close-up on De Niro, and in the afternoon they did the close-up on John Cleese. And I'd heard about actors who, once they've done their bit, they might turn up after lunch in their bathrobe and maybe just to talk through the lines, or even in some cases not turn up at all. And you've got some poor intern reading the lines, or the script continuity person going, no, you're not sticking that in me. I've heard that you doctors are really bad people. That can happen, and it kills the atmosphere. Well, not only did De Niro turn up, he turned up in full costume with his peg leg all strapped up and everything, in full makeup, and he started improvising. And in order to get a performance out of John Cleese, and John Cleese was sitting down, and he was going, "You're not fucking sticking that in me, you fuck! I heard about you fucking doctors! You're not!" And he absolutely went bananas. And it was electrifying to watch. And there was John Cleese, in true John Cleese British style, going, no, calm down. What would you do? And it was amazing to see. I'd heard that he was this mercurial actor, but to see him absolutely explode, and everything on camera, when he was on camera, was contained and inward and small and all in the eyes, but everything, he was giving absolutely everything to John Cleese. It was a remarkable moment. And then one more film that I want to touch on before I think we open questions out to the audience was Iris, the beautiful film where you and Kate Winslet were supporting Judi Dench and Jim Broadbent. What was it like working on such a poignant and touching film, with such incredible actors? It was quite remarkable, and in fact I got a bit of a nostalgic moment walking down the streets here, because we filmed a little bit of it, a fair bit of it actually, in Oxford. This is the film all about Iris Murdoch and John Bailey, and of course the bitter irony that her towards the end of her life she suffered from Alzheimer's. This woman whose great passion and gift was words was robbed of that facility, and in the movie it cuts back and forth between her final years, final days even, and when she and John first met here in Oxford. And the producers, who were the American producers, didn't want to cast me. They wanted to cast someone who was very well known, who should remain nameless, Johnny Lee Miller. And and Richard Eyre had, bless him, had stuck to his guns and said, I don't think that's going to work out because Johnny's busy, and also he doesn't look anything like Jim Broadbent, who'd already been cast as the older John Bailey. And so I was very lucky to get the part. But in terms of acting technique, there's one little story I'd like to say about Kate. There's a scene in the film in which she describes to John Bailey, who's a rather naive character in terms of the ways of the world. She's decided that she's going to devote herself to John, but that he needs to know about her own life, and she's quite worldly wise and sexually experienced. And so she says, I need to tell you about the men who've been in my life. And she does a speech that's maybe a minute long, talking about Tom, Dick, and Harry, and how there was one boy who went off to war who'd asked to she'd had the chance to marry him, and she'd said no, or had just sort of ignored it. And on the first take, there were two cameras. There was a mid shot and a slightly tighter shot on her. And in the first take, as she told me this story, she absolutely broke down in tears as she remembered the man who died in the war and how he went, he went to his death not knowing where he stood or that she could have given him love. And it was deeply, deeply moving. And Richard Eyre, the director, was about to go cut, and she said, keep it running, makeup. And makeup came in and wiped away the tears and reset the makeup. And she did the entire speech straight away again. And this time showed absolutely no emotion at all. She just reported the facts. And that was deeply moving because you knew that deep down it meant a huge amount. This man had meant a huge amount, but she had chosen as a woman to repress that feeling. And that was incredible as well, and very powerful. And then Richard Eyre again was about to go cut, and she said, keep it running. And she went straight back to the top and did the speech again. And this time found something that was probably halfway between the two, in which she began to well up and then pushed it back down emotionally. And eventually Richard said cut, and he said, well, how the hell am I, which one do I choose? They're all brilliant, And the executive director producer of BBC Films was there, and he said, if I could take that tape and show it to every drama student in the country, because it's that sort of relaxation in front of a camera and that confidence and that ability to offer up different choices, which may have made it a nightmare in the edit because, as I say, they were all valid choices. But it was an extraordinary display of true versatility and true confidence as an actor, and I learnt an awful lot from that. And so, without mucking up continuity, one always tries to make each take a little fresher and a little different, but she did it so superbly.
That's incredible.
Cow, she's only about 10.
Right, so let's throw questions over to the audience. If you want to stick up your hand and wait for the microphone to be brought to you. So let's go to the hand on the front row. You, sir.
When you're starting a new role, do you have a process for getting into character that you use?
No, not really. I don't have a technique. I wouldn't say I'm a method actor. It depends. It's horses for courses, really. There was a time when, like playing John Bailey in Iris, where you are trying to get under the skin of someone who, in his case, was still living. I played Philip Larkin, and so wanted to understand the way he ticked, because he was quite a complex character. But that was quite interesting because I had read that it was a TV play for BBC Two 10 years or so ago, more than that. And it was a beautifully written script, but I hadn't done Larkin since O-level, and so I said to the producer, I need to go up to Hull and visit the library, and I meet all these people who were still alive, who knew him, and give me these anecdotes. And she said, well, you can, but it's all in the script. I said, no, I am an actor. I need to research and inhabit this. So I went up to Hull and I met all these people, and I read Andrew Motion's book, and I crammed as much Larkin as I possibly could, and it was all in the script, actually. And ultimately, if it's not in the script, you can't play it. Having said that, more recently I did a film about the partition of India, in which I played Mountbatten, and so I went to meet his daughter, who a lady now in her 80s, because I do think that trying to humanize characters that are, if you have the opportunity to, that are seen as sort of iconic figures, like Mountbatten I've only ever seen in newsreel footage or in all his finery, and from history books, etc. So to try and actually find out something that humanizes him was really invaluable. And she described how, I mean, he was famously a very vain man, and you know, loved, he and his wife were the film star looks of the era, and he loved his uniforms and all that sort of thing. But his daughter described to me, Lady Pamela described to me how, because he was used to being the centre of attention all the time, at dinners, if he got bored or if his mind just drifted, he would always roll up his bread on his side plate into a little ball and unconsciously flick it across the table. Not because he was aiming at anyone, it was just, he just did it. And she said the number of dinner parties they'd been at as a family where people across the table would be going, you know, like this as these. And I just thought that human, you know, that sort of insight was very useful. We didn't have any dining room scenes in the film, actually, but those sorts of things that I find useful. So it depends. It depends on the project. Something like 2012 or W1A, which is has the appearance of being sort of semi-improvised or loose or fluid, is absolutely the opposite. And that's probably the hardest thing, one of the hardest things I've done, because every and is scripted, and we are all, normally in between setups on a set. You know, you're doing the crossword, you know, having a fag cup of coffee, whatever. On that show, we all spent every single moment running the lines, because it was like a piece of music that if you went slightly off, if you dropped a line, you know, you could feel the whole piece of music collapsed. And so we all wanted to, you know, please our director writer. So that was the preparation for that was quite intense, because you just had to learn it properly. Normally actors busk it a bit sometimes, apart from in Shakespeare.
So one question I had about W1A is, surely when reading a script you get a feel for what they're trying to get out of it and the emotion. When reading a script for W1A or 2012, what on earth did you think when all the script says is, oh no, but yeah? How do you...
Well, I know, it's an acquired taste. And in fact, I remember, because we did the pilot on BBC 4 to... and the guy who ran BBC 4 wasn't known for his sense of humour. And the scripts are very long. I mean, they're, you know, if you reckon on a half-hour show being 1 minute a page, you know, this was sort of 50 or 60 pages. And so the guy from BBC 4 said, well, you know, this is way too long. This is now a long script. You need to cut it. And John Morton, the writer-director, kept saying, trust me, it will take half an hour, you know. But it's an acquired taste, because, as you say, you read all these ums and ers, and it's just the rhythm. And particularly, I think, you know, Hugh Skinner, who played Will, the character, who basically only ever said and yeah, but cool, yeah, or whatever. I mean, he was so astonishing. The information he could convey by just using the word cool, in a certain tone, was just remarkable. And, you know, his unspoken passion for Ophelia's character was brilliant. But it's tricky. Sometimes I couldn't, you know, I just had to trust the director, because sometimes you can't see the narrative because it is so cleverly placed below the surface. And sometimes I really did miss the point until he said, no, actually, you know, you're in love with her, not her. And I go, oh, right, I see. No, that was quite challenging, yeah.
Let's take another question. Yeah, let's go to the hand on the back row.
Hello. One of my favourite shows that you've featured in is Gallivant, in which you had a singing role. So I would like to comment on what it was like to be in Gallivant.
What made me decide to be in Gallivant?
Yeah, just what the experience was acting in it and singing. And
Gallivant is a show that most of you won't know. It was an American. It was a sort of bit like Princess Bride. It had that sort of magical, musical, nonsensical feel to it, and it was about a medieval, I guess, knight going on adventures. And I played a landlocked pirate captain. Our ship had somehow got shipwrecked in land. And who's that terrific composer? Alan Menken, you know, an amazing Oscar-winning composer. He composed the songs. Luckily, I sang most of mine in unison with my pirates. I didn't. I spared the audience my solo, but it was a lot of fun. And Joshua Sass, who played Gallivant, was great. In fact, the whole cast were great. And we reprised our pirate roles in Series 2, but it was a short-lived show. I don't know why it got canned by whichever network it was on in America, but it did. But it was a fun idea. You were obviously a fan of it, yeah. And Kylie was in it. Kylie Minogue was in it, wasn't she? And yes, Kylie Minogue did an episode, and Anyway, yeah, lots of people. Yeah, it was fun.
Let's take another question. Yeah, let's go to the hand.
Hello.
Hi.
Some of your best loved roles have been comedy ones, and I was just wondering what you think it makes, what part of you makes you kind of adept to be so good at comedy, and whether it's a very specific kind of acting that makes you adept to comedy.
I think I always subscribe to the, I can't remember who first said it, but it's sort of obvious, but some people who do comedy don't quite get it, which is that people who are in comedies don't know they're in comedies. Or characters who are in comedies shouldn't know they're in comedies. And that's why I think, I know 2012 and W1A wasn't to everyone's taste, but what I found most people responded to was the fact, the absurdity of it was that these people take life very seriously. Or they're meant to anyway. As soon as you signal a joke or signal that you're in a comedy, it goes. And I remember Maggie Smith actually talking about it once about on stage, getting this belter of a laugh in a restoration comedy, whichever one it was, and thinking, oh, that went rather well, and then going for it the next night, and of course not getting it. And then weeks after, for night after night, why aren't I getting this laugh? It was so big in that first time I did it. And it's because she knew it was funny. And as soon we can smell, we can smell when someone's trying too hard. And then, so she just forgot about it, and back it came, And John Morton in W1A in 2012, his note was always, go faster and don't smile. And it was you could see visiting artists coming. I got what he meant, and we understood it as a team. But visiting artists would come in, they'd see this gloriously written character, this maybe a cameo of a few scenes, and would try and bring a performance to it. And on telly, that's very risky, unless the whole style, unless the whole conceit is quite broad. And you could see actors going, but I'm doing less and less, and that's, it's the old cliche. Yes, now you got it. Now you're doing nothing. That's right. So I don't know. I think there is definitely a thing called funny bones. I think you do, certain actors have funny bones, certain actors don't. Nothing more painful than seeing an actor who hasn't got funny bones trying to do comedy. That's painful. It is about instinct and timing. Sometimes there's nothing more delicious than watching an actor who's got exquisite timing, and not everyone does. Thank you.
Yeah, left into the hand, you, madam. There.
Hi.
Hi.
I know there's only a limited amount of information you can reveal about this, but where do we find Lord Grantham, and where do we pick up in the Downton Abbey movie?
Oh, the Downton Abbey movie. Okay, so the spaceship, right? It's no big secret because of the photos of everyone's, or those who follow the show will know that the children are in it, and they haven't got beards yet. So the story, I think, nudges on a few. It's basically another episode. I mean, it's just a continuation of the story. I don't think I'm breaking any trade secrets. It's set a little while later, a few months or a year. I can't quite remember. We always tried to fudge time in Downton because. If you analyse it too closely, you'd go nuts, which is one of the reasons actually we got rid of the dog, because someone had done some nerdy chart, actually working out how old all the characters would be if we started in 1912, and how, even though we got a different dog in the second series for various reasons, who was called Isis, they'd worked out that by the time we got to season 6. The dog should be, it wouldn't be viable. So I said to Julian Fellows, wouldn't it be fun to kill the dog? Because let's face it, most British men of this type, of Lord Grantham's type, are more attached to their dog than their children, and it would get some people weeping, dog lovers at home weeping, and so we shot. So he wrote in the storyline of the demise of ISIS. And we shot it in about April 2015, I think it was. It must have been the final series. And in about May, the word ISIS became very, very powerful in a different way. And I said, I bet the certain newspapers are going to say that we wrote out the dog because of this, what's happening now. Because a lot of people don't realise that actually film scripts and TV scripts are written a long time before they're filmed, and that the film is made a long time before it comes out. So, when the actual, if I may say, shit hit the fan, of course the audience, certain newspapers decided that we'd killed off the dog because of the other ISIS. But so anyway, ISIS isn't in the film, but its successor, Teo, is. So that was very nice to have her back again.
Yeah, let's jump to the hand on the front, just in front.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. Like quite a few people in here, I imagine, I'm a huge fan of the Paddington films. I'm so glad they turned out to be as lovely and heartwarming as they did. But I can imagine in the early stages of production, Paul King and the rest of the crew, they must have felt like a bit of a mammoth task having to adapt such an iconic character in children's literature and having to create such a film. So during production, was there ever a sense of kind of anxiety with the cast and crew? Like, if we screw this up, we're going to ruin so many childhoods. Was there ever that sense?
That's a fair question. It's one that certainly crossed my mind. I felt reassured when I first got the script, and on page 1 there was a stage direction about, or in fact it's in the speech as well, you see the explorer carrying a small timepiece, namely a grandfather clock, through the jungle, and I just thought that was really funny. And I think we're in safe hands here, and then it got better and better as I read on. But no, you're absolutely right. There was a sort of degree of caution, because it's funny, you know, that there was a huge sort of outcry of how dare people try and make a film, how dare Hollywood ruin our beloved Paddington and all the rest of it. But I sort of knew, I felt very confident in Paul King, because he is Paddington. I mean, the director-writer, he really is Paddington, and has this enormous heart and sense of fun and impish curiosity about life. But the most scary thing was when because obviously all the CGI was developing as we went along, but they needed an image to get out there in the teaser trailers, or certainly on the posters and the image of the film. And so they had the very static, lifeless image of the Paddington CGI, without literally any animation in it. And of course, it became this sort of meme, you know, that it looked really spooky, like something out of Don't Look Now or whatever. And it became, people started grafting it into posters of various horror films, and you know, the Blair Witch Paddington and that sort of thing. You know, it was. And people were deriding the film, you know, before they'd even edited. Then there was shows you the strangeness of filmmaking. Colin Firth was the voice of Paddington originally. We rehearsed with Colin. He even, when we did the read-through of the film, Colin was there with all the CGI dots all over him, and a camera here and cameras here, and we were all up on a gantry. They built a gantry for the read-through 5 feet up, so that when he spoke, he had to talk to us like this, so that they could capture everything. So they'd started to edit and animate the entire film with Colin. And, you know, Colin and I are of an age, and we've got fairly similar voices, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the factors that they thought this isn't quite working. And Colin was the first to agree when they started piecing it together that something wasn't quite right. So then they went on the search for the correct voice, and that's when Ben came on board. So that's a huge risk for a film production to take, to change course halfway through the edit on an animation like that, with a figure as iconic as that. But I have to say, with all due respect to Colin, who is a magnificent Oscar-winning actor, Ben Whishaw was absolutely fantastic, and is, and I can't imagine anybody else voicing Paddington now in that environment, in that scenario, in the movies. So it was, I felt for Paul, because it was his baby, his bear, for many years, and indeed then straight on into Paddington 2. I was hoping he was going off to do some sort of hideous slasher movie afterwards, just to sort of change direction, but in fact he's doing Pinocchio, so maybe that's going to be his genre.
Let's take another question. Let's go to the hand in the back. You send the pink.
Thank you. Hi, not including the acting itself, what's your favourite thing about what you do?
What's the favourite thing about what I do? Gosh, that's I think probably it sounds really sort of slushy, but to escape into other characters, really, to tell stories. Ever since I first went to see a play, I can remember at the Mermaid Theatre, I went to see Long John Silver with an actor called Bernard Miles playing Long John Silver. He did it every Christmas, and he frightened the living daylights out of me as Long John Silver, and yet I knew it was make-believe. I knew it was, just a story. And I thought I'd like to be part of that. I'd love to tell stories in darkened rooms and frighten people or make people laugh or whatever. Another experience very early on, going to see a play. We had a lodger who came to stay with us while he was appearing at Greenwich Theatre. And one night I went with my dad. I was only about 8 or 10 maybe, and I went to pick him up after the show. And we crept into the back of the auditorium to watch the last 2 minutes of the show. And I couldn't. And then there was the curtain call, and. But just before the curtain call, he'd had this speech, I think, and he either, can't even remember if it was funny or if it was tragic, but the point is he had 300 or 400 people in the palm of his hand by telling this story, and then there was this applause. And I remember sitting at breakfast the next morning, just staring at him. I thought, how did you do that? You're just the bloke who, is having his egg and knows my mum and dad, and you do this extraordinary thing. I just found it very captivating. So I think to be part of something, I love the collaborative element of either filming or stage work, and to tell a story that takes us out of the rest of the world for a couple of hours is an enormous pleasure for me. That's a bit of a wet answer, but there we are.
And then, let's jump to the hands down here.
Thank you again for a wonderful talk. And I guess it's slightly following on from the question we just had, but in such a brilliant career that's taken in everything from Shakespeare to Paddington, Fire, and Downton, and my personal favourite, W1A, which role is it that you've enjoyed the most and found the most fun, and why?
Oh gosh, that's a tricky one. I mean, I think I suppose it's very hard to single some out, but the fondest memories I have, I mean, I loved making Notting Hill because it was my first sort of reasonable part in a movie, and the gang, the camaraderie that was created by Roger Michell, the director, and with Hugh Grant and Julia Roberts at the helm was quite something to be part of. That was a lot of fun, and it's actually really nice now. It's 20 years ago, that film, and the whole new generation seems to watch it and enjoy it, and that's really lovely. I think Iris, for similar reasons, in that I thought it was a beautifully poignant piece of work, and I loved working, learning from someone like Kate and working with Judi Dench and Jim Broadbent. But actually, probably the most satisfying, bearing in mind that I think we always find things satisfying when we step outside our comfort zone, was a one-person show I did on TV called Diary of a Nobody, which is, I don't know if any of you know it, but it was a newspaper column in the Victorian era about an office clerk called Mr. Pooter, who lived in North London and basically wrote about his universe, which was really quite small, but he thought it was very important. So he was a very self-important little man. And they're hilarious columns, and they were collected into a book, and they've never been out of print. And it's been done as a play, but we did it as originally written as a monologue, which was 2 hours of TV. So it was just me talking to the camera for 2 hours. We split it into episodes, so it wasn't too tedious. And that, again, there was a little thing on BBC Two, but it was the most challenging thing I've done because it was just me and the camera, and all the other characters were invisible. But talking about research, whether one researches a role, I did create a physical world of pictures, of references, of all the other characters in the story, because there are dozens of characters referred to. And in order for me to give any chance of conveying my character's attitude towards them, I felt I needed to know what they looked like. And so I got etchings of these Victorian characters, made up ones or just culled from books, and places that are referred to. They go to Broadstairs on holiday, so I sort of got pictures of bathing machines and everything, just so I could pretend in my head, I could project something imaginatively. I then spent several weeks traipsing around the woods near our house trying to learn the lines. on one occasion, actually, it was getting towards dusk, and I had the script like this, and I looked up and I thought, I have absolutely no idea where I am. And there was no mobile phone signal or anything, and I started getting after about half an hour, and it was really getting dark. I started getting quite sweaty, thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be left out here all night. And then I suddenly saw a lady walking her dog, and I said, where's the car park? And she said, it's about 20 feet that way. Anyway, the strangest thing was when we came to filming, as I say, I'd learnt as much of it as I could, but I did have an autocue as a safety net, but I tended to look through the autocue because you can, I think, tell when people are using an autocue, particularly when it's in close-up. And it was the weirdest thing that when I'd get to certain passages, and as I said these words, I could remember the tree I'd passed as I was learning this particular line, and it was quite. And so when people say, "How do you learn your lines?" I mean, usually it's in rehearsal in 3 dimensions by, oh, Deirdre, do you want a cup of tea? Well, that helps because you're physically giving a cup of tea and that feeds your next line. But when you're doing a monologue, it was something else. It was something, you had to learn it by rote. And but I did get to know a lot of trees, so it was fascinating. So that was deeply satisfying, and nobody saw it, so it was fine.
Let's take another question. Actually, let's go to the hand. Yeah, just behind. Oh, wait, just straight behind.
Thanks very much. I was just wondering, do you have a favourite tale about the experience of creating Downton that not a lot of people have heard?
A question about Downton, about creating Downton. I suppose, it's a tale I've told before, but lots of people say, did you know it was going to be a success? Well, no one ever knows anything's going to be a success, and most of the stuff one does passes most people by, but something peculiar happened with Downton Abbey. In terms of my understanding of it being, or my hopes for it, when I've read the pilot script, I couldn't put it. I wanted to know what happened next. I wanted to know what happened in episode 2, and also I could see all the characters, even though they weren't cast yet. I could sort of visualize them. So those were 2 things that I think have translated into the production. That the characters were very vivid, and people were drawn to them, and also you wanted to know what happened next. A number of people from around the world who said, I sat down to watch the box set and thought I'd watch one episode, and I was still there at 3 a.m, on series 2 or 3. That was a very common reaction. There was something addictive about its soap quality that drew people in. But I think the strangest thing was about 3 weeks into the run. And normally, when a TV show opens, there's all sorts of publicity because everyone, the TV companies are trying to make noise to get the show noticed, and they spend their money on the upfront marketing. And the show opens with X number of millions watching it, and then it always dips. Usually, most of the time they dip by 10, 20, 30, or if it's terrible, 50%. Ours went up. Our ratings went up after the first week. And we all started, ringing each other and saying, what's going on? And I talked to the producer, and he said, I don't know, this doesn't usually happen. And it was... It was about 3 or 4 weeks in, and I'd gone to pick up my son from school, and some lad came up to me, he was about 10 or 11, and said, I don't like that, Thomas. And I thought, what are you doing up at 9 o'clock at night? You're meant to be in bed, you're not, and also you don't watch period dramas, you're not interested in that sort of thing. And we began to sort of realise that the demographic was really beginning to get very broad, and not the usual costume drama audience. And I can't quite put my finger. I still to this day don't quite know why it worked. But it was what was really interesting was when we went to America, and it opened there 3 months later, and on PBS. Now PBS is the public broadcasting service there, and is poorly funded, and it's sort of, I suppose the nearest equivalent is the BBC because it doesn't have adverts. But this didn't quite save them, but it certainly gave them a new lease of life, because the huge part of the demographic watching it were teenage girls. And suddenly they were coming to PBS and watching other PBS shows. And so it was an extraordinary turnaround for them. But I remember going to the first sort of public Q&A that we did in New York, and this is 2011, I guess, and asking, and the show hadn't aired yet because it was on PBS, about to come out, and I said, how many people here have seen the show? And I would say 75% of the audience put their hand up because they'd all been streaming it illegally. But it just, so that it was constantly a surprise. It was also a couple of times got a bit freaky. There was a particular fan who was besotted with Lady Edith, and she dressed and in fact did look incredibly like Lady Edith. And so with all these Q&As we'd go to, I'd say I would be with Laura on stage, and I'd say, second row on the right, and there she was. There was also the lady who was so taken with Mrs. Hughes, the housekeeper, that she had the Chatelain's keys tattooed onto her hip. So you do get some strange things. But my favourite comment about the show is something that Rob James Collier, who played Thomas the Footman, said when we've been asked about fan reactions around the world. And is it very different in different countries? And he said brilliantly that in America people cross the street to tell you how much they love the show, and in Britain they cross the street to tell you they don't watch it.
And then, there's a question just on the aisle.
Hi, I'm so glad that you mentioned Notting Hill. That's one of my mom and I's absolute favorite movies. But I especially loved the scene, the dinner party scene when you're talking to Julia Roberts' character and you have no idea that she's a famous actress. And I was wondering if you've ever been in a situation in your personal life, in your great career, all the amazing actors and actresses that you've worked with, if you've ever had a similar situation.
The answer is yes. Were two things in that scene in Notting Hill. That was interestingly just in terms of storytelling. A lot of people love that sequence. It's a scene in the film where Hugh Grant's character, for those who don't know the film, brings the most famous film star in the world, who he's sort of bumped into and is falling in love with, to have supper with his mates, his university mates. In fact, in real life, it was his Oxford mates, because Richard Curtis always had a dinner every year with his Oxford mates, with this chap called Piers, who cooked, and Piers always burnt the food, every single year. So Tim McInerney in the film burns the food, but they still love him, and they have this ritual every year. And that was where the film started. That was the seed of the idea. He thought, what would happen if I brought the most famous film star in the world round to Piers' house in our annual reunion? How would the others react? And there would be so-and-so who would go, oh my God, you're the most famous film star in the world. And there would be, the bloke who really didn't have a clue who she was. And so that's where the seed of the film started, and that's how it grew from there. And then when we went to New York, we had Julia Roberts very kindly hosted a sort of soiree at her agent's apartment, and we were leaving the hotel, and we had to get in different taxis. And I was waiting with Roger Michell, the director, and these two guys came up, one young guy and one older guy, and they started chatting to Roger Michell, who they clearly knew. And I could see Tim McInerney pulling off in his cab, sort of looking out the cab going like that. And I was going, what's right? And I was introduced to this couple of guys. And as their names were mentioned, a taxi horn went. And so I missed the name. And this young guy said, hey, I've just been with Marty. You want to see the photograph of me and Marty? And this whippersnapper pulled out this Polaroid of him with Martin Scorsese. And I thought, you're a bit of a name dropper, aren't you, mate? And we said our goodbyes, and Roger and I got into our cab, and off we went. And I said, he was a bit of a cocky young shit, wasn't he? Showing off about Martin Scorsese, He said, well, you do know who that was? I said, well, I don't know. He's a young chap. And he said, that was Leo DiCaprio. And they were rehearsing Gangs of New York, which is why they'd had this Polaroid together. Anyway, by the time we got to the party, somehow, I don't know, Julia Roberts opened the door and said, I heard. So yeah, it happens in real life.
Let's jump to another question. Was there a hand?
Thank you very much for the wonderful talk. But I suppose as a history student, one thing I'm really interested in a period piece like Downton, is there a very conscious process for you of sitting down, doing lots of research and thinking about the history? Or is there advisors who say, well, no, people wouldn't do that, or that's not how it would be?
I think one of the reasons the show has resonated, quite apart from every department working to the best of its ability, was the attention to detail. And that came about because we had a historical advisor who, in fact, as he said, his day job was working for the College of Arms. So there's not, and I said, what does that mean? He said, well, basically, I have to work out where everybody sits at the next coronation. So he knows absolutely everything there is to know about etiquette and, you know, high society and the establishment and that sort of thing. He's an ex-army officer. He was an equerry to one of the royal household. So it's absolutely his world. And he used to drive the art department nuts because he would pretty much go around with a ruler, you know, on the dining table and say, no, that knife needs to be 2 inches that way. And he and Julian Fellows could sit and talk. Julian Fellows, who wrote the show, could sit and talk for hours about, you know, etiquette and who would stand up when, you know, if you did, you just stand up when a lady comes into the room, and you'd never have your hands in your pockets. To the extent that we had to reshoot a scene because I'd had my hands in my pockets after dinner, in one after dinner scene. I thought, oh well, surely after dinner, just standing in the hall, you know, that's all right. And absolutely not. You know, we're not going to let that detail go. I'm sure in real life they probably did put their hands in their pockets, but that was the sort of tone of the show, that there was going to be a sort of crispness and a attention to detail that was not going to be got away with. So we, as I say, we reshot that scene, and in series 2, when I had a new white tie and tails made at Huntsman in Savile Row, which was very nice, I insisted they didn't put pockets in my trousers, so that I was never tempted again. But you learn fascinating things. I know, I mean, I'm sure you're all from the aristocracy, so you know this, but I mean, you're at Oxford, for heaven's sake. But things like turning at dinner, I didn't know about that in these grand houses, you know, the hostess would initiate conversation with the person, let's say, on the left, and then after you finished a particular course, she then turns, and so everybody turns, so that no one is left out, because you know, it's like sometimes if you're at a big dinner table and you can sit there like a numpty in the middle, because they're all chatting to either side of you, and you feel like Billy No Mate. So this is a sort of a social nicety to make people feel included. But you could be in the middle of a hilarious story, and suddenly, you know, Madam turns, so you've got to I'll finish that later, and you know, go over here. So it was things like that, and things like the details about, you know, that Carson the butler would, and you see this in other films that get this detail right, would never knock and come into a room. He would just glide into a room and be part of the wallpaper until it was a fitting moment to talk. Because otherwise, if you just you spend the entire day as the family going, come in, I said, come in, come in, come in, you know. So it just became a thing, which is why it's such a brilliant conceit for a show like Downton, where it's all about eavesdropping and so forth, where the staff could melt into a room and know absolutely everything about what's going on with the upstairs characters, but not the same the other way around. So yeah, it was there was a great deal of attention to detail in that, and I think that's one of the reasons the show worked. And one thing I've always banged on about, and I always take my hat off to the art department, because every single letter we read, every telegram, whatever, doesn't just say blah, blah, blah on it. It's got absolute detail that is pertinent to the scene that we're in. So if I'm reading, if my line is, here's a letter from Rose in New York, they're having a wonderful time, it is a letter in Rose's handwriting saying, dear, you know, Robert, you know, we have Atticus and I are on honeymoon, we've had the most brilliant time, last night we went to see this at the ballet or whatever, and it's just wonderful. It puts you in the moment rather than just, you know, other shows I've been on where they're just written blah, 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 blah. You know. So that was very precious, actually.
So I think we've got time for one final question, if there's one. Yeah, we'll jump to the hand.
Hi, thank you very much for coming to talk to us. I was just wondering, obviously Downton's one of those shows where you can sort of end up shouting at the TV because terrible and wonderful things happen. I was just wondering if you ever got a script or like had a moment where you're reading like through a storyline plan and just thought, oh my god, no, or this is amazing, or just got really frustrated.
I didn't quite hear the beginning of the question. Can you put the mic?
Sorry. Just that Downton can be like it's an amazing and equally frustrating show at times. I was just wondering if you ever got a script or like a plan for a storyline and thought, oh my gosh, no, or yes, this is incredible.
Oh, I see.
Just something that stuck out.
You're referring to Downton?
Yes.
Yeah. I did say, particularly in seasons 4 and 5, I did keep saying to Julian Fellows, can my IQ get any lower? You know, there is stuff going on right under my nose that that my character is completely oblivious to, or he's being so ridiculously stubborn about something, or blinkered, or You know, it just doesn't equate. It doesn't seem to me to be similar to the guy we knew in series 1 or whatever. And yet he said, bear with it. And so you'd always find Robert, for all the frustrations and the shouting at the TV-ness of it, you would usually find that by episode 7 or 8 there was something redeeming about the journey that he'd been on. But yeah, no, I got very frustrated with how thick he was sometimes. But then also, Julian would always say, don't put your own values on the character. People are contradictory, and people do. One of the best things he said, Laura Carmichael, who played Lady Edith, really wanted to know whether whether her what was her name? Was it Gregson or the lover she had who went off to Berlin? She really and so therefore she was grieving for his loss. But she said, I really need to know, is he going to come back into the show? Because that's going to affect my trajectory. And Julian quite rightly said, but you don't know whether you're going to get hit by a bus tomorrow. How do you know? You don't know your own future. Edith doesn't know her own future. She has to live each moment, and that's a very good note. In the end, when it came to it, he did write Charles. I remember I had to report to Cora, my wife, the demise of Charles Gregson, who whatever his name was, not Gregson, anyway, hit in Berlin. And instead of just saying he'd gone missing in Berlin, there was this very graphic description of how he'd been beaten up and virtually hung, drawn and quartered. So there was absolutely no doubt in Laura's mind that he was not coming back. There was not a shadow of a doubt. But apart from this, so yes, Laura was frustrated that she didn't have certainty as to the resolution of her own story. But yeah, I got frustrated a couple of times about mine too.
Well, what not to end. Ladies and gentlemen, please do join with me in thanking Hugh.